So welcome to tonight's webinar, SAT/ACT tips and tricks for test day. Just before we get started, I was hoping to go over just a few housekeeping rules for our audience. We're looking at running this webinar for about 45 minutes. Those 45 minutes will encompass a formal presentation, as well as we'll leave a question and answer period at the end for you. So we encourage you to take advantage of that. Ask your questions in the chat, and we will try to ensure that our panelists, our admissions experts, will get a chance to actually respond to them at the end of the webinar. This webinar is recorded, and you will receive a recording sent to your inbox within the next couple of days. And we encourage you to share that link. We encourage you to rewatch it for yourselves. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. That's what we're here for. So before we begin, let's just go over a brief agenda. So we'll be discussing the SAT/ACT overview, how colleges use both scores, the key differences, the questions, types, and tips, and then tips to actually tackle each test, as well as the question and answer period that we did mention. And I'm sure you want to know who our admissions counselors are today. Who are the experts that are speaking to you today? So we have Maisha and we have Marina. Before I sort of let them speak about themselves and their expertise and why they really are some of the best, I want to let you know who we are. So we're Foundation Learning. We have a 96% acceptance rate. What we do is maximize your odds of getting into your dream college. We're the country's leading admissions counselors, and I think 99th percentile in the DSAT and ACT tutors. We offer one-on-one admissions and test prep to help you prepare at your own schedule, as well as we have dedicated focus towards really securing merit scholarships. So that's a little bit about us. And we encourage you to book a free consultation with our learning team. We are going to try and get back to everyone on this webinar and get as many questions as answered as possible. But if by chance we don't happen to get to your question, we encourage you to book that free consultation and sort of have that one-on-one and personalized approach with a admissions counselor who will be able to answer your questions and your own unique needs. That's enough from me. I'd love to hand it over to our panelists here to get us going.
Thanks, Andrea. Hi, everyone. My name is Maisha. I've been with the team for about 1.5 years now. So a little bit more about me. I did my undergraduate studies at Columbia University, where I studied neuroscience and behavior. I then went on to Albert Einstein College of Medicine to get my PhD in biomedical sciences, and now I'm a scientist working in biotech. But on the side, I really love mentoring students at different stages in their career, whether it be high school or above, and really work on helping people get into their dream colleges and giving as much advice or counseling as I can. So I'm happy to talk to you all today and just discuss a little bit more about the SAT and the ACT.
Hi, I'm Marina, and I'm also a counselor with Foundation Learning, and I did my undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania, where I studied at the Wharton School, and then went on to work in management consulting for some time, and went back to business school at the University of Chicago, where I got my master's in business administration. And at both schools was really enjoyed being involved in the admissions process, either as an alumni interviewer or at the University of Chicago as one of the students. It's on the Student Admissions Committee, and currently work in the research field within tech, but also really enjoy helping students as they go on this exciting journey and figuring out kind of what is the best path for them and how to do it. So that's a little bit about me, and looking forward to speaking with y'all tonight.
All right, so I guess we'll get started and just do a little very brief overview of what the differences between what actually the SAT and the ACT are. I'm sure everyone here is very familiar with these two standardized exams, but basically the SAT and the ACT are used to assess a student's college readiness and proficiency. in particular subjects. For the SAT, it's math, reading, and writing. And for the ACT, it's math, reading, writing, and science. And the purpose of these standardized exams is to kind of level the playing field a little bit more when it comes to assessing a student's potential to succeed at a particular college. So it's just one way that colleges use to evaluate students in a more uniform manner.
And we'll speak to a little bit about how those get used. As Misha mentioned, it's really to give like that one other data point. But one question that obviously comes up quite a bit is, what about schools that are either test blind or test optional? So 3 things. One, test blind schools, that actually means that they are test blind, so they will not look at your scores. You do not need to send them. However, test optional schools, that's the decision will kind of depend on it's your decision whether you want to send your scores in, and something that you want to evaluate based on other elements of your application and how the scores that you achieved kind of fit into that, and whether they can help to show like an academic skill that maybe you're not able to show otherwise, or if they can help like fill a gap, or if they're really strong and just overall boost your application. And the third thing to remember is that even at schools where not test blind or test optional, the test is required, it's just one part of your application, one part of many parts. You have your essays, obviously all of the work that you did in high school in terms of grades and extracurriculars. You've got your recommendation letters. It's just one piece. So just a reminder that it's not the end all be all and not something to overly stress out about. You want to do your best, but it's just a part of the application process and just one part of the things that the committee will review.
So what are the key differences between these 2 exams? So first of all, why are there even 2 exams? This is kind of to give students more options. You'll see as I'm going to go through that the exams themselves are structured differently. The content is slightly different. So it gives students the ability to kind of choose whatever is best for them. So for the SAT, there are 98 questions, whereas for the ACT, there are 215. So this ends up averaging out to around 82 seconds per question for the SAT and 52 seconds per question on the ACT. So, timing is something that you'll want to consider when choosing between the SAT and the ACT. Like we mentioned earlier, the SAT does not include the science section, whereas the ACT does have a science section. There are no formula sheets provided for the ACT, whereas there is a formula sheet for the SAT. For the SAT math, you're allowed to use your calculator for the entire section. Now that the SAT is going digital, you will still be able to use a calculator, but it'll also be on your screen. And that's not different for the ACT. You can use a calculator for the whole math section. The scoring is something that you may be familiar with. You might have heard the perfect score. The perfect score on the SAT is a 1600, or in the past a 2400. This is different on the ACT, which is scored from 1 to 36. Do keep in mind that both exams are scaled. It is graded depending on the scores of other peers who take it at the same time as you. But at the end, you do get a composite score. And finally, the SAT has evidence questions, and whereas the ACT questions kind of appear in random order of the passage. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind, that the reading comprehension techniques and ways to practice are slightly different for the SAT and the ACT. But at the end of the day, either exam is sufficient if you are applying to a school that is test optional or requires exams. At the end of the day, it depends on what the student prefers.
Yeah, and so we'll do a quick overview of the different types of questions for the SAT and the ACT. On the SAT, you have, go ahead and go to that next slide. You'll see you'll have 3 different kind of big sections, right? So you'll have reading, which is going to be looking at your ability to understand a passage, understand words within the context of that passage, look at how the author is using different pieces of evidence to make their argument. There will also be kind of some like data analysis. In some ways, it's similar to what you'll find on the ACT, and even what you might find on the ACT in the science section, in the sense that you're doing a lot of like analysis of the passage and looking for clues, looking for a hypothesis and how the author supports that. So definitely, really focus on, as you're in school, make sure that reading comprehension is something that you are paying a lot of attention to and developing the skills and kind of tools to do that type of work. Then there will be the writing, which is this is where like your grammar is going to be helpful. It's really going to focus on finding different ways that you can improve the delivery of a passage. So it might look at, you'll get questions around like words and context. You'll get questions about like different structural changes that you can make to a passage to make it stronger. There will be questions about grammar, different like punctuation, subject-verb agreement. So definitely make sure you're paying attention to that too as you're in your classes, and be a little bit of the grammar police as you prepare for the SAT writing, if that's the test that you choose to do. And then math will focus on things that you've done in algebra. You'll have a formula sheet to leverage, but you want to make sure that you know how to use all of those formulas that you've used over time in your math classes. You're looking at problem solving skills, data analysis again, right? They want to make sure that you can do all of that work that you're going to have to do in college, where you're given a bunch of information and you're required to process it. There will be some trigonometry, geometry, and certain problems where you really have to go through like a number of steps to get to the final answer. So, keep paying attention in those math classes. Make sure that you're practicing a lot in preparation. The types of questions remain consistent, so really a great opportunity to just keep practicing, figure out which ones are hard for you, and put some focus towards those.
So for the ACT, there is a little bit of a difference when it comes to the reading section. Like Marina said, in the SAT, there's more evidence-based questions. So that means kind of understanding how to contextualize the questions that you're being asked. Whereas in the ACT, there's definitely more of an emphasis on, what's the point of the passage? What exactly is the author trying to get across? It's more about the main ideas and kind of understanding or trying to interpret what an author's intentions were, rather than trying to find key clues within passages. The English section similarly does focus a lot on grammar rules, a little bit about logic as well, on how different paragraphs are structured. The math is very similar as the SAT, as to the SAT. But here in the ACT, you have a greater emphasis on trigonometry and geometry. Definitely keep in mind that by the time you end up taking the SAT or the ACT around junior or even senior year, you should be well equipped with the math knowledge that you really need. Of course, for some people, it may be math concepts that they had taken a long time ago, so it's definitely important to practice and brush up on those trigonometry and geometry and algebra skills that you had learned in the past. And finally, for the science section, it really focuses on one's ability to interpret data. I think a lot of people, at least some people I know, were a little apprehensive that, science is not my strongest subject. Is it okay to still try and take the science section or the ACT as it includes a science section? And the answer is definitely yes, because it's not about science in particular. You won't be asked to solve particular chemistry questions or physics questions. It's more about understanding the scientific method, understanding how data is presented, reading and interpreting tables. So it's more of science in general and not really quizzing you on specific scientific field questions.
So how do you decide which one to take? There are a couple of tips here in terms of like which one might be the best fit. I also recommend just try both, right? Try a practice test in both and see how they go. Try it in like a realistic environment and get a feel for both of the exams and see which one might be the best fit. But a few clues that can kind of help you figure out what will probably be the best fit are noted here. So SAT, like if you like to take a little bit more time to really think through things, you're okay to go through like multi-steps. SAT might be good for you. Math, if math is your strongest subject, you want to probably try the SAT. It might be a really good way to go. And similarly, like if science is your best subject, the ACT might be a good fit. Although, like we just talked about, you're not being tested on specific science concepts. It's more about like the scientific method and things like that. Just generally speaking, if your curiosity is for science and like that kind of analysis, the ACT might be a better fit for you. ACT will also have slightly more like straightforward questions. You're going to be answering more questions and more quickly. And so science and like reading comprehension, if those are stronger for you than math, then the ACT might be a better fit. That being said, I highly recommend that students take a practice test in each, like a shortened one if needed, because you might sort of surprise yourself and find that although you think math is your best subject, that actually the types of questions that are asked on the ACT just like jive better with you. So give both of those a shot and vice versa.
So next we'll go into tips to tackle each test. So I'll talk a bit about the SAT. There's definitely no need to memorize any formulas. So I would say definitely utilize that time rather than memorizing things to actually practice taking SAT questions. If there are certain formulas that you find are easy for you to remember, of course that can save time, but don't, spend all day trying to remember certain formulas because you think you really need to, because like we said before, there will be a formula sheet. And ensure you know how to use your calculator for all question types. So while you take practice exams, definitely notice what kinds of mathematical questions are asked and that you can quickly know what exactly you need to do, plug into your calculator to get the answer. That'll definitely save you time. For the reading section, be familiar with how to identify evidence in text. We're stressing this a lot, the evidence-based reading and writing, but that's really one of the main focuses of the SAT is understanding the context clues. So that's what we mean by evidence in text. The reading questions we mentioned earlier are pretty similar in general, but it will be helpful if you practice skimming. Skimming is being able to kind of quickly look over a text without having to spend time reading every individual word. Definitely look at transitional sentences, look at key transition words, and understanding author points of view, whether it be first person, second person, third person, etc. And it's really, really nice to time yourself when you're taking these practice exams. Like Marina said, it's important to kind of put yourself in a position as you would be the day of the exam, because that's the best way to really know how well you're scoring. It's timing yourself. And you have 71 seconds on average. So in general, that's more than enough time. Of course, we're saying on average, that means there are certain questions that you may answer much quicker than others, and you can utilize the leftover time to maybe spend more time on the reading section, reading through those passages before you answer the questions. So those are just some overall tips for the SAT in particular.
And on the ACT, you are not going to get your formula sheet. So you do have to memorize those formulas. You want to make sure that you can execute them and that you can do simple math without a calculator. You are allowed to bring a calculator. But again, remember, like, it is so easy to make mistakes on a calculator. So you want to be able to have that quick math in your head to be able to sort of sanity check things, even if you want to try to use your calculator where possible. You also want to make sure that you are studying up on your vocabulary, things that you can do like early in your junior high and high school career, just like word a day or something like that, just to familiarize yourself, be able to take educated guesses, things like that. And again, like, we've kind of tried to really hone in on the need to experience a test in as close to test-like circumstances as possible to make sure that you feel comfortable on test day. You don't want to have any surprises or have a sense for, like, am I going at the right pace? So do time yourself. Make sure that when you're doing your practice tests that you're giving yourself the same amount of time that you would get in a real-life environment. And given the emphasis of the SAT on that science piece, make sure that you're very familiar with the scientific method. And those are some important things that can get you ready to go for the ACT.
I think Andrea's hopping on, but her screen is lagging. But it is Q&A time, so definitely feel free to pop your questions in the chat.
I do see one here, or I see a couple. So what determines if a school that is test optional will use
Okay. It decided to, can you see me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, I apologize for that. It seemed like it lagged. There was a couple questions in the chat, and I unfortunately don't have access to the chat, but it was under Q&A.
I remember the second question, and I think Marina was just saying what the first question was.
Yeah, I was reading the first question, and I believe it was about what determines whether a college will use your scores to boost your application. I can take a pass at that one, which, if you send your scores to a test optional or test required school, they will look at your scores. Whether the sort of process of deciding whether they boost your application is something that you want to think about talking through, like with your school counselor. One way to think about it kind of on your own is like, where is my application strong? Did I take the hardest math classes and the hardest science classes, but maybe I didn't take the most advanced English classes and I happened to do really well on the writing section. So this would be a way to show that I'm like very competent in that area. That might be something to think about, right? And vice versa. Can also be depending on different schools, colleges have different levels of familiarity with different schools, and each school kind of provides their school spiel and like how classes work and what the course choices are. If your school, for example, does not offer a ton of, advanced math, an SAT may be a good way to show, I still have that skill. There are a lot of different factors that would play into it, but those are a couple of examples. Anything to add, Nisha?
No, I think you covered it. The other question was, what does it mean that the SAT is graded on a scale? So what that means is that every question you answer has particular points. Every question that you get wrong, you don't get points off for, but every question you get right, you get plus points. And that raw score, which I don't think we see, then gets converted to that scaled score, which is between 200 to 800. And what I mean, other than that it gets converted to the scaled score, is also it's a curved score. So that means an 800 ends up being whatever the highest possible scoring was for that sitting of the SAT. So if the highest score, the person who got the most number of questions right, let's say got 90% of those questions right, that will be that 800. So I remember thinking back in high school, there were some students who took the SAT, let's say in January, and they got a question wrong and still got an 800. But then there were students who took it in March and got no questions wrong and still got an 800. If you're wondering why that's possible, it's because of this being graded on a curve.
So I actually had an individual reach out to me with a question before the webinar started. So they asked, what is the difference between the new SAT and the digital SAT? So since the SAT went digital, I'll leave this to both of you to respond to what the actual differences are.
Well, it's definitely shorter now that it's digital. That's one of the main perks, that the length of the exam is shorter. The number of questions has changed. Those are the main perks, I would say, that overall there are fewer questions. The content itself has not dramatically changed. So it's not like you need to study in a different way. It's more that the format is different.
Awesome, thank you. So let's let's continue on. What is all the formulas for ACT math you need to know?
I think there is actually a great blog post on the quad page that has a great overview of this. I wonder if we could share that. But essentially it would be, your arithmetic formula. So make sure you're comfortable with like the order of operations, percentages, ratios, like interest calculation, simple and compound. Then you get the algebra piece. So all of your like quadratics, exponents, being able to do factoring, geometry, the area, volume, things like that. But I would definitely recommend checking out this post. It'll just be a very good reference point for the type of formulas that you'll need to know, and kind of memorize those and do your practice just to make sure it's covering everything.
And I took it one step further. I actually included a link to all of our posts about the ACT. So the trigonometry practice questions and answers. There's some really great articles about score release dates and some planners as well. so you know how to actually study for these tests. For both, we offer study plans for both SAT and ACT. Awesome. Let's keep going. Great questions, everyone. Does SAT have any essay writing at all?
I don't believe so. So especially with the digital SAT, now that it's combined, the reading and writing sections, there's no essay. For the ACT, there is an optional essay. I think I saw a question also, should someone take an ACT with writing? That optional essay comes at the end after you complete the exam. It depends on what school you're applying to. Some schools do wish for you to have taken the writing, the essay section, and some schools don't. If you feel personally that you excel at writing and you miss the fact that there's no essay on the SAT, I would say go ahead and take it and showcase your skills, your this particular skill set, but it's not mandatory.
Fantastic. So somebody asked, I heard that the questions adapt to how you're doing on the SAT in real time and is not general. Is that true?
I believe that is true. It's like a multi-stage adaptive process depending on whether you're getting things right or wrong. So definitely good to keep in mind and make sure you're staying focused, especially at the beginning of that test.
We actually just did an entire webinar on this last week. I can put the link in the chat for everyone, and it's all about the new the DSAT. So we have somebody sort of asking about the two practice SATs. We would love to get through these personalized questions, but unfortunately, because of the time and make sure that we respect everybody's time, we won't be able to answer super personalized questions. But we do have that free consultation available to our audience here tonight, where you can sit down and get that question answered. Let's keep going. We'd love to hear from our audience, so keep asking us your questions. And I apologize, I don't if I missed anything. But in the meantime, I'd love to hear from our panelists. And obviously, whether a student is writing the SAT or the ACT, there's a lot of stress that comes with that. So, what piece of advice do you have for parents whose student is about to write either of the tests?
Well, I can share my kind of perspective on this. I think two pieces of advice. One is try to start early, just in terms of, providing whatever resources you're able to help support some early studying, a little bit of early testing. I think, people have different ways of studying. Some people are marathoners and they like to start early and kind of like go at a, reasonable pace. And then others are sprinters and they'll hold the studying for the end. And both of those ways are fine, right? We all have different ways of approaching learning. But I think that it's good to take kind of an assessment early to get the sense for how much time you're going to need and create a plan that makes sense with your personal study habits. Because the last thing you want to do is be like cramming in the couple weeks before and just be exhausted and overwhelmed. If you are a sprinter, just do it intentionally, right? Like, okay, I think I need, this many weeks to study. I'm going to do it in this way. So I really do suggest creating a plan that fits with your study style. And then the second piece, I think this applies to both the SAT and ACT and just more broadly to the college admissions process. This is such a high pressure, high anxiety experience. And while, as a student, I felt that. And as a parent, I'm very scared for my kids about that, because I also know that I probably am going to like contribute to that. So I keep telling myself, like, please don't do that, to my own kids, because at the end of the day, wherever people land, as long as they have a good attitude and are open-minded and excited about taking on the college experience, it's going to be great. I think we all work in different fields. I know in my field, I work with people that went to all different kinds of colleges, and some of the people, and I went to Penn, an Ivy League school. I work with folks that went to schools across all different levels, across all different sizes, things like that. And, these are great ways to open doors, but there are a lot of different doors in life. And I just think that that's important for both parents and students to remember. So we don't want to make this process into an overwhelm. There's already so much stress for students. So try not to contribute to that. That's like my note to myself, right? Here's my letter to myself to read in 10 years when the kids are doing this process.
Aisha, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, Marina gave some good tips, and I totally agree with everything she said. I saw one of the parents or guardians here kind of cheering on how their student is going to be taking the practice ACT tomorrow and another practice SAT coming up soon. So I love to see that. I love how encouraging parents are and how involved they are during this process. So, as I'm sure you all recognize, this is a big part of your student's life. It's a big milestone, taking these practice exams, taking these real exams, applying to college. So it's wonderful to be there for them. And of course, to keep in mind that too much pressure is not very healthy at a time where the students themselves probably put a lot of pressure on themselves and hold themselves to high standards. I would say definitely try to avoid comparing your student or your child to someone else. That never feels good when parents are saying, oh, this person, I heard this person got a perfect score, you need to get it up, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely find healthy ways to encourage your student. If you feel that they're falling behind, try to stay positive, because they need that positivity around to kind of really stay motivated and improve their score.
Well said. So we actually have a question in the chat, and I'd love if you could take a minute to respond to this. So they ask, I am a senior at the moment and graduate in December. I should start college in 2025 and am worried about the applications, practicing, and personal essay. Do I have enough time to go over all these aspects?
I'm just processing. Like, what year are we in right now?
2024.
Yeah, I live in Texas, so it's also hard for me to figure out what part of the year it is, because it's always warm. So it is April, all right, and you're graduating in December, college in fall of 25. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess the way I'm interpreting this, please correct me or chime in, is that this is a student who is graduating early, and okay, gotcha. Thank you. Graduating December. Yeah, I mean, it seems like this is almost like a junior year, but like a little longer in a way in terms of like the schedule. So that does feel reasonable. I think that it is a lot of work, but the reality is it's a lot of work no matter when you start it. So I think that as long as you have a good approach to planning, and can kind of like create a schedule and timeline and figure out everything you have to do and when you're going to do it, that it's certainly doable. Anyone else want to like understood the timeline in your mind better than I have?
Yeah, I agree. You definitely, I would say you have plenty of time, because this is really when the bulk of the action takes place, right? It's before the winter of senior year. And I understand that your senior year is kind of finishing up in December, but around that winter time before you start college um, is when, you know, all the applications start running. If you're applying early decision, it starts in the fall. But between April and September, I would say, is when the bulk of everything happens. You know, you're taking your final, not even final, you're taking a couple of rounds of SATs or ACTs if you want to, really getting those letter of recommendations prepared, practicing questions, going through all that. So I think this is the right time to be thinking about those things. And I wouldn't be worried about not having enough time. Yeah, I think you definitely do have enough time.
Thank you. Hopefully that answered the question. So I don't actually see any other questions in the chat. I think maybe we can give our audience one more moment to get their final questions in, their final thoughts, and then we can wrap it up. Ladies, I don't see a question. Am I missing anything? You're very welcome. You're very welcome. So I don't see any questions. So I think we can wrap up tonight's webinar. Marina, Maisha, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Thank you for, did we get a question? Is it, oh, okay, so let's answer one more question. We have a minute. Is it okay to submit scores to all colleges?
Yes, there's nothing wrong with it if you find that you feel comfortable with how you scored. And if you're comfortable submitting it to all the colleges you're applying to, that's not a problem.
Awesome, great question. Awesome, great question. So we're about 45 past the hour. I'd love to wrap up tonight's webinar. Marina, Maisha, as I was saying, thank you very much for all this wonderful information. Thank you for being very present, and thank you for sharing your experience with our Foundation Learning audience. And to our attendees tonight, thank you very much for being here. We hope that you got a ton of value out of this webinar. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any sort of questions, comments, concerns, and additional questions. One of our team members will definitely be able to help you out. Thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.